And hello, it's been a little while since I last reviewed a retro handheld, but in all fairness, I have been waiting for this one to arrive at my doorstep, and this is going to be a handheld that is probably the ultimate device for retro emulation at around $150 to $160. It's powerful, has some neat features to accompany it, and it's actually affordable for what it is. This is the Anbernic RG505. Let's dive right in. The exterior design consists of plastic for the entirety of the build. This device looks like a Switch Lite, but the texture on some of the surfaces offers more grittiness, which some people might actually prefer. I would say that this device does feel like it is pretty well built, but it does still feel pretty plasticky to me. It does have the heft to make it feel nicer in hand, but the texture on the surface does feel a bit cheap to me. However, that's just my opinion, and honestly, some people do prefer that plasticky feel to their retro handhelds. On the front, you're going to find your usual set of buttons with that typical Anbernic quality to their buttons. These analog sticks have Hall sensors in them to make them more precise and allow for pretty much no drifting. While they do feel a little bit loose, they do still feel better than most handhelds, and the grip around the edges is a nice touch. On the top, you're going to find a set of shoulder buttons that are quite clicky and do feel really satisfying to press. You will also find a headphone jack and the only USB-C port for both power and data. On the bottom, you're going to find the stereo set of speakers, and you're going to find a micro SD card slot with the sleep wake button. On the right, there's going to be a home button and another button for switching between the Android front end and Anbernic's own front end, which is really convenient to have around. On the left, there's going to be a volume rocker. On the back, there are going to be some grips made of rubber, and that's about it. Now, this device is designed quite differently from other Anbernic handhelds, even recent ones, but it's a design that works overall. This device does feature a 5-inch 960 by 544 OLED display that looks pretty good. However, this one to me doesn't look as nice as the one on the Anbernic RG503, and it does seem like they are tuned a little bit differently. It just seems a little bit less colorful and saturated than the 503 by default, which is not my preference. But this is still an OLED panel, which means that you can expect the richest and deepest blacks with the brightest whites. It's really cool that they went with this OLED panel because this is one that has been absent from their handheld since the RG503. But I'm glad that they brought it back, honestly, with this handheld, and it is one of the features that makes this one so special for other offerings. The speakers are going to be bottom firing stereo speakers, which sound okay. Not too loud, not too low. They are satisfactory for just about everything I tested on this, at least when it came to gaming, so have a listen. This device features a Unisoc Tiger T618 CPU, which is a powerful chip that you will also find on the Retroid Pocket 3 Plus, and I believe the Palkity X18S Black Edition. It comes with a Mali G52 GPU, 4GB of RAM, 128GB of internal storage, and a 5000 mAh battery. Now, this is a pretty huge battery for a device like this, and I'm happy that they included it. As for the OS, like I mentioned earlier, we are running on Android, and also different front end of Anbernic's, I want to say. Now, that other front end is very basic in its functionality, and that does offer, I suppose, more of a menu-based interface that would be more manageable to people who really just want to plug and play without worrying about loading things onto it. But I will stick to Android for now, like just the stock Android interface, as I just prefer this interface personally. This device does not come with the Play Store, at least my unit didn't. However, I have heard of it being included or something like that, but I honestly am not too informed about it. However, even though it doesn't come with the Play Store, it does come with every emulation app that I will need, so I don't really mind that exclusion so much this time around. We do get Redream after all, which is nice. But with that said, it's time to move on to gaming performance. So let's begin with GBA performance. Using a standalone GBA emulator is going to be a special game that I loved as a kid. I tested Dragon Ball Z Supersonic Warriors to really push this emulator as much as possible. I mean, GBA games are really easy to run on lower end systems, so it really shouldn't be that much of a problem for this one, and it ran perfectly. I had zero performance issues with GBA regardless of what game I played. And to boot, everything looked great on this OLED screen, though when a GBA game is displayed on the higher resolution screen, as well as a large larger display, it will look especially pixelated unless you do some tweaking around it. So really no worries there. I think most people will really enjoy it for GBA. Performance was also flawless with SNES here. I tested out Mortal Kombat 3 and got really stellar performance. I mean, this system is another one that's super easy to emulate for a lot of devices, but I still wanted to share my thoughts on it. So, like I said, performance was really good. So I know that every SNES game that you will want to try will look and run really nicely on this system. Also, I wanted to note that these buttons were really good for playing SNES games as they have a very solid feel to them. So I really enjoyed SNES experience on this system. Now, Nintendo 64 was pretty good here too. I ran this emulator with Majora's Mask, and while this is definitely one of the more demanding games, this device handled it without any issues whatsoever. I'm starting to think that this device is more powerful than the considerably more expensive RG552. Now, that device didn't exactly show a lot of issues running N64 games or anything, but it did with the higher end systems that I am about to mention. But yeah, N64 also ran really nicely on the system, and I think that most people will be very happy with how N64 performs here. Dreamcast, however, absolutely blew me out of the water. So through the Redream emulator, I decided to run Sonic Adventure 2 like I usually do, and it performed exceptionally. I was surprised to see that there were zero visual issues here or performance issues whatsoever, even during the more demanding sections of this particular level. Everything was just so smooth, and thanks to that OLED screen, this game just looked fantastic on this device. I seriously think that it is a sight to behold, and it makes me want to recommend this system if you want a good Dreamcast machine to take with you on the go, because it really just absolutely crushed it. So moving on to GameCube, which is quite a jump, I was also surprised to see how well it ran. Granted, not every game will perform this well, but there was this obscure racing game whose name I always forget that ran pretty well. There were some stuttering issues here and there, but there were minor, and frankly, with the games I tested, they were kind of rare, except for audio issues, which were rather prominent. But you should still keep that in mind. However, for the price, the fact that you can play GameCube games is pretty neat, even if not every game will be playable, or at least not at full speed. This will especially apply for games that just have a lot going on in them, such as Twilight Princess, for example, so you should be wary of the limitations of this device. However, I was still impressed with what I got from it. Now, moving on to PlayStation 1. So this system obviously ran really well here too, as it is a very simple system to run for a lot of devices. So the RG505 definitely knocked it out of the park with this obscure crash game called Crash Bash, I think, that I found. I have never heard of this battle-style crash game, but it exists, and it ran damn well on this device. I'm sure that for retro games from this era and earlier, you won't have any issues even upscaling the resolution to get the most out of it. The PS1 is another fantastic system to emulate, especially considering how many great JRPGs are available from this generation. This is, of course, for the exception of Final Fantasy VIII. Just needed to get that off my chest. Next would normally be PSP, but for some reason I couldn't load ROMs onto the PPSSPP emulator on my unit. It also doesn't help that the language has been set to Chinese, I believe, but I can't read any of it, so I can't really do anything about it. Sorry about that. So I will be moving on to PS2 instead through the Aether SX2 emulator. I tested out Kingdom Hearts 1 and I was surprised with how well it ran here. Granted, performance wasn't perfect here and there were stutters still to be seen, and this was during one of the less demanding portions of the game, that being the beginning sections of it. And I would definitely consider this game to be playable here, though I am sure that something as intense as Dirge of Cerberus would really challenge the system, especially, since we didn't even get 100% speed out of Kingdom Hearts 1, even for the earlier sections. So I would say that for a good chunk of other games, it will still struggle considerably, but I was still surprised to see that some PlayStation 2 games are definitely going to be playable here. Battery life on this device should be pretty good on this device here. On average of about 4 hours, I would say that I got, which is still quite good, but I have seen reports of it lasting up to 8 hours, which is awesome. Now, that will heavily depend on which games you're playing on it, and I'm sure that the stock animated background doesn't really help with the battery life, but you can change that, of course, and overall, it's good here, as I expected, considering the huge battery. So, I ended up coming out of this feeling much more positively about this device than I thought that I was. It's honestly a good value considering everything that you get. This is probably Anbernic's best device right now, period. Not because it's so powerful, because they do have their Win600 series after all, but it's because it offers so much at such a competitive price that it's hard not to recommend. It's well built, it has a beautiful screen, runs Android with a bunch of emulators pre-installed, has Hall sensors, a huge battery, and it's less than $160 right now. So if you were thinking of picking one up, then I can vouch for that train of thought, because the RG505 is genuinely a really good device. So yes, strongly recommend it. So thank you so much for watching this video all the way up until the very end. I do very much appreciate it. Now, if you are interested in getting the RG505, I did leave a link down below that you could use to get directly to it. And I would appreciate it if you used that link. And also, if you are interested in seeing other retro handhelds, I am going to be making a video actually pretty soon this month in December, comparing every retro handheld that I have and just deciding from different categories which one I like the most. But that's probably going to be for closer to the end of this month, but do look forward to that. Now, with that said, please make sure to follow me on Instagram, where I do post every now and then, and also people like to ask me questions over on Instagram, and I do see them over there more easily than I do on other platforms at times, so I do recommend that you message me over there. But with that said, this has been Francisco from Tech Summit. Thank you for watching, and until next time, enjoy.